Were medieval women nothing more than fragile dolls locked away in towers waiting for a prince? Did they have no say, no smarts, no power in a world from roughly 500 to 1500 CE? Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew. Number 7. Women were universally frail and sickly, dying young. The tales often paint a picture of medieval women as delicate figures, constantly ill and fading away before their time, especially due to childbirth. This story is everywhere, from old novels to modern movies. Yet, when you look closely at the actual lives of women during this period, you find a very different reality. Many women across various social classes endured challenging physical lives and often lived to a respectable age, sometimes even outliving their male counterparts. They were not always confined to sickbeds. Consider the daily life of a peasant woman. Her routine was a constant cycle of physically demanding tasks. She was often up before dawn, tending to livestock, milking cows, and churning butter. She would then spend hours in the fields alongside men, performing tasks like sowing seeds, weeding crops, and harvesting. The work of scything wheat or threshing grain was incredibly strenuous, requiring significant physical strength and endurance. During harvest season, the days stretched from sunrise to sunset, filled with relentless labor. She also carried water from the well, gathered firewood, and prepared meals over an open fire, all activities that built resilience and strength. Her body was a tool for survival and productivity, and she was expected to be robust. Archaeological findings from medieval cemeteries often reveal skeletal remains of women showing strong muscle attachments and signs of physical stress, consistent with a life of hard labor, not a life of constant fragility. Beyond the fields, women were often skilled artisans and craftswomen. A weaver, for instance, spent hours at a loom, operating foot pedals and throwing shuttles, a rhythmic but physically taxing activity. A brewer might spend her day lifting heavy sacks of grain, stirring large vats of boiling wort, and carrying heavy barrels of ale. These were not activities for the weak. Records from towns like Norwich in the 14th century show numerous women listed as brewers, indicating their active participation in a physically demanding industry. Childbirth was undoubtedly a dangerous event in medieval times, and maternal mortality rates were higher than today. This is a fact that should not be overlooked. However, it is a leap to conclude that all women died young because of it. Many women gave birth multiple times throughout their lives and survived each event, continuing to work and raise their families. The medical treatises of the time, such as those associated with the school of Salerno in Italy, contain sections dedicated to women's health and childbirth, often reflecting accumulated practical knowledge passed down through generations of midwives. These texts discuss ways to manage complications and care for the mother, suggesting an active effort to support women through pregnancy and delivery. For example, the writings attributed to Trotula of Salerno, a female medical practitioner from the 11th or 12th century, provided extensive advice on gynecology and obstetrics, showcasing a medical understanding that aimed to ensure safe deliveries. Furthermore, many women who did not engage in heavy manual labor still lived long, active lives. Noblewomen, while not tilling fields, often managed vast estates, overseeing servants, tenants, and accounts. This role required extensive travel, often on horseback, and significant administrative stamina. They were often responsible for the health and well-being of their entire household, including the care of their children and sick family members. A noblewoman might spend hours dictating letters, reviewing ledgers, and engaging in social calls that formed critical networks for her family's standing. As Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, lived into her early 80s, a remarkable age for any person of her time, and she remained politically active for much of that long life, embarking on crusades and negotiating treaties. Her life was far from frail or short. Consider also women in religious orders. Abbesses, especially of large and wealthy convents, held immense responsibilities. They governed entire communities of nuns, managed extensive lands, acted as feudal lords, and engaged in complex financial transactions. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, lived to be 81. Her life was filled with intellectual pursuits, including composing music, writing theological treatises, and advising popes and emperors. She also experienced intense visions and traveled widely to preach. Her physical endurance must have been substantial to maintain such an active life for so many decades. The daily routine of a nun, including long hours of prayer, manual labor in the convent, and often intellectual work like copying manuscripts, demanded discipline and physical resilience. While epidemics like the Black Death drastically reduced populations across Europe, affecting both men and women, the common perception that medieval women were inherently weak or doomed to die young simply due to their gender does not align with the historical evidence. Many women were strong, resilient, and lived long, productive lives, contributing significantly to their families and communities through their physical labor, administrative skills, and intellectual pursuits. Their bodies were built for endurance, and their lives were often a testament to their strength in the face of considerable challenges. Number 6, medieval society was entirely patriarchal with no room for female influence. The idea that medieval society was an absolute patriarchy, where women had no real influence or power, is a persistent myth. While formal power structures were often dominated by men, women found and wielded influence in numerous ways, both formally and informally, across different layers of society. Their impact was felt in households, communities, churches, and even royal courts. One significant area of female influence was within the household, which in the medieval period was not just a home, but often a center of economic production and social life. The lady of the house, whether a peasant's wife or a noblewoman, was the manager of the domestic economy. She oversaw the daily operations, allocated resources, directed servants, and managed the household budget. For a wealthy noblewoman, this meant managing a large retinue of staff, ensuring the smooth running of vast estates, and maintaining the family's social standing through hospitality. Her skills in management and organization were crucial to the family's prosperity and reputation. Records from English manorial courts often show women acting on behalf of their absent husbands or managing household affairs independently, demonstrating their practical authority. For example, the household accounts of Elizabeth de Burgh, Lady of Clare, from the 14th century, reveal her meticulous management of extensive properties, demonstrating her significant economic control. In the realm of religion, women often held positions of substantial power and influence. Abbesses of powerful convents were not merely spiritual leaders, they were formidable temporal lords. They governed large landholdings, collected rents, administered justice in their territories, and commanded respect from powerful secular figures. Some abbesses, like those of Quedlinburg or Gandersheim in the Holy Roman Empire, held imperial immediacy, meaning they answered directly to the emperor and wielded authority comparable to a bishop or count. They minted coins, raised armies, and negotiated treaties. These women exerted political and economic influence far beyond their convent walls. Hildegard of Bingen, as mentioned before, corresponded with emperors, popes, and kings, offering spiritual and political advice, showcasing her significant informal influence on policy and decision-making at the highest levels. Noblewomen and queens, even if they did not always rule in their own right, often acted as regents for their young sons, wielding full royal authority. Blanche of Castile, mother of King Louis IX of France, served as regent for many years in the 13th century. She successfully put down rebellious nobles, negotiated peace treaties, and steered the kingdom through turbulent times, demonstrating formidable political acumen and military leadership. Her son, even after coming of age, often deferred to her wisdom. Isabella of Castile, Queen Regnant of Castile, was not merely a queen consort. She held power in her own right, commanding armies, overseeing legal reforms, and uniting Spain. Her influence was not just a quiet whisper in a king's ear, it was a loud command across an entire nation. The marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand of Aragon was a partnership of equals in governance, a fact often highlighted in contemporary chronicles. Beyond the formal structures, women exerted influence through their roles as patrons of the arts and literature. Many noblewomen commissioned books, supported artists, and fostered intellectual discourse. This patronage shaped cultural trends and preserved knowledge. Christine de Pizan, one of the earliest professional female authors, relied on the patronage of powerful women like Isabeau of Bavaria, the Queen of France, and Margaret of Burgundy. These patrons not only provided financial support, but also actively engaged with her works, promoting a more positive view of women. In towns and cities, women were active participants in the economy and society. They ran businesses, belonged to guilds, sometimes with their own female-led guilds, like the silk workers in Paris, and engaged in trade. A successful businesswoman, whether a merchant, a baker, or an innkeeper, held economic power that translated into social influence within her community. Her reputation, her network of contacts, and her financial standing gave her a voice and a degree of independence. Guild records from various European cities show women listed as masters, owning shops, and training apprentices, demonstrating their integral role in the urban economy. Even in peasant communities, where formal power structures were minimal, women held significant informal influence. They managed household labor, controlled the food supply, and often made crucial decisions about family finances and alliances. They formed networks of support and exchange, sharing knowledge about healing, childcare, and agricultural practices. Their collective wisdom and cooperation were vital for the survival and well-being of the community. Village court records sometimes show women acting as witnesses, plaintiffs, or even arbitrators in disputes, indicating their recognized standing within the community. The idea that medieval society was devoid of female influence is a simplification. While the legal and political systems were largely male-dominated, women found many avenues to assert their authority, manage resources, shape culture, lead communities, and make their voices heard, often through determination, skill, and strategic alliances. Their contributions were fundamental to the functioning of medieval society at every level. Number 5. Women were always oppressed and subservient to men. The narrative of medieval women being perpetually oppressed and subservient to men is a common one, but it overlooks the complex realities of relationships, the agency women possessed, and the various spheres where they exercised autonomy and even leadership. While societal norms and legal frameworks often place women in subordinate positions, this did not mean a universal experience of oppression or a complete lack of personal agency. Many women found ways to navigate, negotiate, and even defy limitations, forming partnerships and asserting their will. Marriage, for example, was often presented as a relationship of male headship, yet in practice, many medieval marriages were partnerships, especially among the working classes. In peasant households, survival depended on the joint labor of husband and wife. The wife managed the domestic sphere, which included not just cooking and cleaning, but also managing resources, producing goods like cheese, butter, or textiles, and caring for livestock. The husband managed the field labor. This division of labor made them mutually dependent, fostering a sense of shared responsibility and collaboration. Decisions about children, land, or resources often involved both spouses. Records of village life often show couples acting in concert in economic transactions or legal disputes, suggesting a shared household authority. Among urban artisans and merchants, wives were often active partners in their husbands' businesses. They might manage the shop, keep accounts, deal with customers, or even run the business independently when the husband was away or after his death. This active economic participation gave women a degree of autonomy and a recognized public role. In cities like Paris or London, women were frequently listed as femme sole, allowing them to conduct business independently without their husband's consent or liability, a legal recognition of their economic agency. This status was crucial for women running bakeries, taverns, or textile businesses, enabling them to make contracts, sue, and be sued in their own name. Beyond the household, women found spaces for self-governance and community building within religious institutions. The beguinages, for instance, were communities of religious women, often laywomen, who lived together without taking monastic vows. These women engaged in prayer, charity, and often manual labor, supporting themselves. They lived independently of male control, elected their own leaders, and managed their own affairs. The beguinage movement, widespread in Northern Europe from the 12th century onwards, offered women a profound alternative to marriage or traditional monasticism, providing a space for intellectual and spiritual growth and a high degree of autonomy. These communities demonstrated a collective female agency and a rejection of conventional societal expectations. Some women even challenged traditional gender roles directly through their actions and writings. Christine de Pizan, an author in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, explicitly challenged the misogynistic literature of her time. In works like The Book of the City of Ladies, she celebrated the achievements of women throughout history, arguing for their intelligence, virtue, and capabilities. Her writing was a direct intellectual defiance of prevailing negative stereotypes, showcasing a woman using her voice to fight for a more just representation of her sex. She was not silent or subservient. She was a powerful intellectual advocating for her gender. Even within aristocratic and royal households, women often wielded significant informal power. A queen or noblewoman might serve as a trusted advisor to her husband, influence political decisions through persuasion, or act as a mediator in disputes. Their social networks, their ability to entertain and forge alliances, and their often considerable dowries gave them leverage. The letters of medieval noblewomen often reveal their engagement with political events, their management of estates, and their strong opinions on family matters. They were not merely passive recipients of male will, they were active participants in the intricate dance of power. Furthermore, legal systems, while generally patriarchal, also contained provisions that protected women's rights and provided avenues for redress. Dower rights ensured a widow's access to a portion of her deceased husband's property, providing her with financial security and a degree of independence. Women could inherit property, sue in court, and make wills. While there were certainly limitations, these legal mechanisms provided women with tools to protect their interests and assert their rights against unfair treatment or abuse. Court records from medieval England and France contain numerous instances of women appearing as plaintiffs or defendants, demonstrating their willingness and ability to engage with the legal system. The idea of universal female oppression simplifies a diverse and dynamic historical period. While patriarchy was a dominant framework, it was not absolute. Women across different social strata found ways to exercise agency, exert influence, and build lives that were often far from subservient. Their experiences were varied, encompassing partnership, leadership, economic independence, and intellectual defiance, challenging the narrow depiction of medieval women as perpetually downtrodden. Number 4. Women were only valued for their beauty and ability to bear children. The belief that medieval women were solely prized for their physical attractiveness and their capacity to produce offspring is a common misconception that overlooks the vast array of other qualities and contributions that were highly valued in them. While beauty and fertility were certainly appreciated, women's intelligence, piety, administrative skills, economic contributions, and practical abilities were often considered equally, if not more, essential for their individual and family success. In aristocratic and royal circles, while a queen's beauty might enhance her image, her primary value often lay in her ability to forge political alliances through marriage, her diplomatic skills, and her capacity to bear heirs, particularly sons. However, beyond this initial role, a queen's effectiveness was judged on her administrative competence, her wisdom as a counselor, and her influence in maintaining political stability. While a queen like Eleanor of Aquitaine was valued for her vast territorial inheritance, her strong political will, and her ability to lead and negotiate, not just her looks or her children. She was a powerful ruler in her own right, and her strategic intelligence was a key asset. Similarly, Isabella of Castile was celebrated for her sharp intellect, her unwavering religious devotion, and her decisive leadership on the battlefield, qualities that far outweighed mere physical appearance. For noblewomen managing large estates, their administrative prowess was paramount. They were responsible for overseeing vast households, managing finances, directing servants, and ensuring the productivity of their lands in the absence of their husbands. A woman who could effectively run an estate, manage accounts, and handle legal disputes was highly esteemed. Their letters and manorial records often praise women for their efficiency, their prudence, and their ability to maintain order and prosperity. These were not qualities related to beauty, but to intelligence, discipline, and practical competence. Piety was another hugely valued attribute for women across all social classes. For many medieval people, spiritual devotion was a cornerstone of life. Women who demonstrated deep faith, engaged in charitable works, or pursued a religious vocation were held in high regard. Saints like Catherine of Siena or Bridget of Sweden, through their intense piety, visions, and intellectual contributions, gained immense influence and respect, advising popes and kings. Their values stemmed from their spiritual connection and wisdom, not their physical appearance. Within convents, abbesses were chosen for their leadership qualities, their wisdom, their administrative skills, and their spiritual guidance, not their beauty. In the realm of economic life, women's skills and labor were indispensable. Peasant women were central to agricultural production, performing arduous physical labor in the fields. They also transformed raw materials into essential goods within the household, such as spinning wool into thread, weaving cloth, baking bread, and brewing ale. These were tangible economic contributions without which a family could not survive. A woman who was skilled in these crafts was a valuable asset to her household and community. Their records from medieval towns show women actively involved in trade and craft guilds. A woman who was an expert weaver, a successful brewer, or a skilled baker was valued for her craft and her contribution to the local economy, not simply for her looks or fertility. Beyond specific crafts, women were often skilled healers and midwives. In an age before formal medical training was widespread, the practical knowledge of healing passed down through generations was invaluable. Women cared for the sick, delivered babies, and often possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies. Their expertise in these areas was crucial for the health and survival of their communities. Trotula of Salerno, a female physician, was valued for her medical knowledge and her contributions to women's health, as documented in her medical texts. Moreover, a woman's virtue, honor, and reputation were often held in higher esteem than superficial beauty. A woman of integrity, known for her honesty, loyalty, and good judgment, brought honor to her family and herself. In a society where family reputation was paramount, these moral qualities were deeply significant. Marriage alliances were often based on a family's standing and wealth, but also on the perceived character and capabilities of the bride. The idea that women were merely decorative objects or baby-making machines is a narrow and inaccurate view. Medieval society, in its myriad forms, valued women for their intelligence, their administrative abilities, their spiritual devotion, their economic contributions, their practical skills, and their moral character. These were the qualities that truly contributed to the flourishing of households, communities, and kingdoms. Number 3. Women had no legal rights or agency. The sweeping statement that medieval women had no legal rights or agency is a significant oversimplification of a complex legal landscape. While the legal systems of medieval Europe were predominantly shaped by patriarchal norms and practices, women were not entirely devoid of legal standing. They possessed certain rights, could engage with the legal system, and exercised agency in various legal and economic matters, particularly concerning property, inheritance, and business. One of the most significant legal protections for women was the concept of dower. Upon her husband's death, a widow was typically entitled to a portion of his lands or property for her lifetime, usually 1/3. This dower was a customary right, often enshrined in law, designed to provide her with economic security and a degree of independence after her husband's passing. This meant a widow was not left destitute and could manage these lands and their income independently. She could even take her husband's heirs to court if they tried to deny her dower rights. Court records from medieval England are replete with cases where widows successfully sued to claim their dower, demonstrating their legal agency and protecting their financial interests. Women could also inherit property, especially in the absence of male heirs. As daughters could inherit land, titles, and wealth, often becoming significant landowners in their own right. The inheritance practices varied across regions and social classes, but primogeniture inheritance by the eldest son was not universally applied to the exclusion of daughters. In some regions, like parts of France, daughters could inherit equally with sons. In England, noblewomen could inherit vast estates and even titles if there were no male heirs, making them powerful feudal lords. For example, Isabel de Fours, Countess of O'Malley in the 13th century, was one of the wealthiest and most influential women in England, inheriting significant lands and titles. Her life demonstrates a woman wielding substantial legal and economic power. In legal proceedings, women could act as plaintiffs and defendants. They initiated lawsuits to protect their property, collect debts, seek redress for slander, or even prosecute cases of assault or rape. They appeared in local courts, manorial courts, and even royal courts. While they might be represented by male attorneys or guardians, they were still the primary party in the case, demonstrating their legal standing. High court roles from medieval England, like those from the Court of Common Pleas, show numerous instances of women engaging with the legal system, defending their interests, and pursuing justice. They were not merely passive subjects of the law. Furthermore, women had the right to make wills and control the disposition of their personal property. A woman could bequeath her clothes, jewelry, household goods, and even money to whomever she chose, demonstrating control over her personal wealth. Widows in particular had considerable freedom in making wills. Wills from medieval London show women leaving legacies to family members, friends, and religious institutions, highlighting their autonomy in financial matters. They also often served as executors of wills, managing the estates of the deceased, a position of significant legal responsibility. For businesswomen, particularly in urban areas, legal provisions sometimes allowed them to act as femme sole, literally single woman, even if they were married. This status granted them the right to conduct business independently of their husbands. This meant they could enter into contracts, incur debts, and sue, or be sued in their own name without their husband's permission or liability. This legal recognition of their economic autonomy was crucial for women running shops, taverns, or craft businesses. The records from cities like London and York show numerous examples of married women operating as femme sole, engaging in commerce, and asserting their legal rights within the marketplace. While coverture, the legal principle where a married woman's legal identity was subsumed by her husband's, was widespread, its application was not absolute. There were regional variations, customary exceptions, and practical workarounds that allowed women to retain some control over their property in person. Even within coverture, a husband could not always alienate his wife's dower lands without her consent, and wives often had to actively participate in the legal conveyance of such lands. The legal rights and agency of medieval women were not identical to those of men, and they faced specific legal challenges. However, to claim they had no rights or agency at all is inaccurate. They had rights concerning property, inheritance, and business, and they actively used the legal system to protect their interests, demonstrating a significant degree of legal and economic agency within the constraints of their time. Number 2, women were uneducated and illiterate. The myth that medieval women were universally uneducated and illiterate is a widespread falsehood that dismisses the vibrant intellectual lives and diverse educational opportunities available to many women during the Middle Ages. While formal education was not as broadly accessible as it is today for either gender, and literacy rates varied greatly by social class and region, numerous women possessed significant learning, served as patrons of education, and contributed to the intellectual and literary landscape of their time. Convents were major centers of female learning. For women who entered religious life, particularly those from noble or wealthy backgrounds, convents provided an environment where literacy was not only encouraged, but often required for prayer, study, and the copying of manuscripts. Many abbesses were highly educated, managing extensive libraries and fostering intellectual pursuits within their communities. Ratsvit of Gandersheim, a 10th century canoness, was a playwright and poet who wrote sophisticated Latin dramas and epic poems. Her works show a deep knowledge of classical literature and theology, proving that women were not only educated but also creative and intellectual forces. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, was a polymath who wrote extensively on theology, medicine, natural science, and composed music. Her intellectual output was immense, and her knowledge profound, demonstrating an education far beyond simple literacy. Among the aristocracy, education for girls was common, although it often focused on practical skills for managing a household, along with religious instruction. However, many noble women also learned to read and write, often in multiple languages. They were taught by tutors, chaplains, or learned members of their households. They had access to private libraries, commissioned manuscripts, and acted as patrons of scholars and writers. For example, Christine de Pizan, one of the first professional female authors, relied on the patronage of highly educated noble women like Isabeau of Bavaria and Margaret of Burgundy. These women not only funded her work, but also engaged with her intellectual ideas, suggesting their own significant intellectual capacity. The Duchess of Burgundy, Margaret of York, was renowned for her large and valuable library and her active role in commissioning and collecting manuscripts. Beyond the religious and aristocratic elite, there is evidence of literacy among urban women, particularly those involved in commerce. For women running businesses, keeping accounts, writing letters, and managing transactions required basic literacy and numeracy. Merchant wives often handled the books and correspondence for their husbands' businesses. Records from various European cities show women signing their names on legal documents or acting as scribes for commercial purposes. While the extent of literacy among working-class women is harder to quantify, the practical needs of their lives sometimes necessitated it. The rise of vernacular literature, works written in local languages rather than Latin, also contributed to female literacy. Romances, chronicles, and religious texts became more accessible to those who did not have a formal Latin education. Women were often the primary audience for these works, and many could read them themselves. Literary sources from the late medieval period often depict women reading for pleasure, both individually and within social groups. Furthermore, medical education, while not institutionalized for women in the same way it was for men, still existed through apprenticeships and practical learning. Figures like Trotula of Salerno, mentioned earlier, illustrate that women could achieve high levels of medical knowledge and practice. Her writings on gynecology and obstetrics suggest not only her own literacy, but also her engagement with learned medical traditions. It is important to remember that literacy was not universal for men either during this period. The ability to read and write was often a marker of social status and occupation rather than gender. While fewer women may have attended universities, which were primarily for men in preparation for the church or law, this does not mean they were uneducated. They received education through alternative channels, whether in convents, through private tutoring, or through practical apprenticeship. Many medieval women were not only literate, but also highly intellectual, actively participating in the intellectual currents of their time, and leaving behind a rich legacy of writings, patronage, and scholarly engagement. Number 1. Women were powerless and confined to the home. The myth that medieval women were entirely powerless and confined to the home is one of the most pervasive and misleading. This narrative ignores the diverse roles women played across all social classes, from the highest echelons of royalty and nobility to the working lives of peasants and urban craftswomen. Women exerted power in political, economic, spiritual, and social spheres, often demonstrating remarkable agency and influence far beyond the domestic hearth. At the very top of society, royal and noble women often held significant political power. Queens, even if not ruling in their own right, frequently served as regents for their underage sons, effectively governing kingdoms. Blanche of Castile, regent of France in the 13th century, was a formidable political figure. She successfully crushed baronial rebellions, managed state finances, and negotiated crucial treaties. Her authority was absolute, and she commanded armies and presided over royal courts. She was not confined. She was the active ruler of a major European power. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, ruled vast territories in her own right, participated in a crusade, and exerted immense political influence across England and France for decades. Her life was defined by travel, political maneuvering, and military leadership, a stark contrast to any notion of confinement. Isabella of Castile, as queen regnant, held ultimate authority over her kingdom, leading military campaigns, establishing new legal frameworks, and directly shaping the destiny of Spain. She rode into battle and made decisions that changed the course of history. Beyond these celebrated queens, numerous noblewomen managed vast estates and feudal holdings. When their husbands were away on crusade, at court, or engaged in warfare, these women took on full administrative responsibilities. They oversaw agricultural production, collected rents, managed servants, and even administered justice in their local manorial courts. They were de facto feudal lords wielding considerable economic and social power. The letters and account books of these women demonstrate their meticulous management and decision-making capabilities, showing them actively engaged in complex economic and legal affairs. They were not confined to a single room, but oversaw sprawling enterprises. In urban centers, women were integral to the medieval economy. They were not just homemakers, they were entrepreneurs, craftswomen, and merchants. Women ran taverns, bakeries, breweries, and textile workshops. They were often members of guilds, sometimes in their own right, and in certain trades, like silk weaving in Paris, women formed their own exclusive guilds. They bought raw materials, produced goods, sold them in markets, and managed their own finances. Records from medieval cities show numerous women listed as independent business owners, engaging in contracts, borrowing money, and participating in legal disputes related to their trades. For example, in 14th century London, women were actively involved in over 100 different trades, from chandlers to fishmongers, demonstrating their widespread economic activity. They were out in the marketplace, running shops, and contributing directly to the urban economy. Peasant women, far from being confined, were central to the agricultural labor force. Their lives were a continuous cycle of physically demanding tasks in the fields, plowing, sowing, weeding, and harvesting alongside men. They also managed the household economy, which included tending to gardens, raising small livestock, spinning wool, weaving cloth, and preparing all food. Their labor was indispensable for the survival of their families and the functioning of the rural economy. Their lives were defined by constant outdoor work and active participation in the production of food and goods, not by being shut away. Even in the spiritual realm, women exercised immense power. Abbesses of powerful convents governed large estates, controlled significant wealth, and held feudal authority over their tenants. They were political players, corresponding with secular rulers and ecclesiastical figures, and influencing appointments and policies. These women were not confined to cloistered prayer. They were powerful administrators and spiritual leaders who navigated complex political landscapes. Hildegard of Bingen, for example, was a powerful spiritual and intellectual force who traveled widely, preached publicly, and advised powerful men of her time, clearly not confined. While the home was a crucial sphere for medieval women, it was often a vibrant hub of economic activity, production, and social interaction, not a place of idle confinement. Women were active participants and often leaders in their households, communities, and even kingdoms. Their capabilities were not limited, and their impact was felt profoundly across all levels of medieval society, challenging the myth of their universal powerlessness and confinement.